Welcome back to The Four. November is National Diabetes Month, and our friend from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Shanti, is back today to discuss the research behind ultra-processed foods increasing our diabetes risk. Welcome back, Shanti.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So, with National Diabetes Month coming to a close with the month in November, tell us why it's important to maybe steer away from those highly processed foods.
Yeah, so we understand that diabetes is something that affects a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
12.2% of adults in Michigan, a little over 14% of adults across the nation. So it's something that can cause complications, right? Beyond just dealing with the condition, it can cause things like heart problems, nerve damage, even amputation and vision problems.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
serious. Now, the great thing is that there are a lot of things that we can do to prevent diabetes and also live healthier with diabetes. And I think maybe we can explain a little bit what diabetes is before we dive into the study. But essentially, it is when your body has too much blood sugar. It's too high. And so when we eat food, like, for example, sugar, carbohydrates, it breaks down in our body and it eventually becomes blood sugar. Now, in order for us to use that effectively, we want to use that for energy. We need something called insulin. Insulin is a hormone, and it almost acts like a key to unlock for that blood glucose to leave the blood and to be used where we want it to be used in the cell.
Okay.
Okay. So when we
Gotcha.
don't have enough of those keys, enough insulin, or the key just isn't fitting well, sometimes that happens with type 2 diabetes where we're just not able to use the insulin like we wanted to. That sugar builds up, and that's where it can cause complications over time.
Okay. I've never understood the relationship between insulin and diabetes. Thank you so much. What a great
Yeah.
explanation. Now, with this being Diabetes Awareness Month, a recent study came out that linked some pretty significant risk factors to ultra processed foods.
Yeah, so this was a study published in September, and it analyzed the diets of over 300,000 people, and it looked at their diabetes outcomes. And they actually divided all the foods that they were eating into different subgroups and just looked at the frequency of how often people consume those foods and what it did to their diabetes risk. And so they found that when they ate these four specific categories of food, it increased their risk for diabetes. Actually, uh, every increase of 10% in consumption of this ultra processed foods resulted in a 17% increase in diabetes
Oh,
risk. And so,
wow.
if you're wondering what these four main foods are, they are sugary and artificially sweetened beverages. So, those are going to be your sodas, your sweet tea, things like that. Ultra processed meats, so bacon, sausage, lunch meat, and then ready to eat meals like your frozen dinners, and then finally packaged salty snacks. Those were the four main types that they found had the biggest risk. Now, they did say that, hey, not all ultra processed foods are created the same. Some things like breads and breakfast cereals are ultra processed, but they don't have that risk associated with them.
Interesting. Now, how can we be better consumers? How can we? I mean, I think it's easy to understand. Okay, do not get a frozen TV dinner from the freezer aisle. That's easy enough. But if you're
Right.
trying to decide between different products, how do you know what's the better version? How do you know if something's not as ultra processed as something else?
Yeah, generally that is going to come down to the ingredient list. If we see a lot of names on the ingredient list that we don't recognize, it tends to be that what these have in common are a lot of artificial colors, preservatives. They have emulsifiers like lecithin and things like that.
Like a lot
So
of
if we
words
see
that
a
we wouldn't
really,
recognize.
yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's not always true, right? Like there's scientific names for even very healthy ingredients, but it's a good way to tell if it just is a laundry list of things. And I think if you take away anything from our conversation today, it's that, you know, we can have some of these ultra processed foods once in a while, but they shouldn't make up a big part of our diet. So if you're someone who's like, well, I do eat lunch meat twice a day, that's something we can think about reducing. So the whole goal with this is to try to replace as many of our ultra processed foods that we have in our diet with more whole options. So for example, if you're someone who drinks a lot of sugary and artificially sweetened beverages, maybe you can try to mix in some sparkling water in there, some unsweet tea, sweeten it with a little bit less sugar than you normally would have. If you're someone who eats a lot of ultra processed meats, try sliced boiled eggs, grilled chicken, canned tuna on your sandwiches instead. And if you're someone who eats a lot of ready to eat meals, try to maybe eat those a little bit less often and find other ways to have convenience. So, for example, I really like having salad bags that are already mixed for me. They've got a lot of whole ingredients in them. But they have the convenience of them by just having to mix it together and be ready very soon. And then for packaged salty snacks, maybe you have things that are go-to really tasty options for you. For me, it's cucumber slices with buffalo sauce, carrot chips with hummus, and things like that.
Gotcha. Great, great suggestions. Now, if someone out there, they're watching this right now, they're maybe feeling a little nervous because a lot of those 4 items that you just mentioned are
Yeah.
all heavy parts of their diet. Where can they
Yeah.
go to get more information to really adjust their overall lifestyle and these dietary factors to make sure that they're protecting themselves from future risk of diabetes?
For sure. Going to your doctor is always going to be the number one thing to do, right? They're going to understand your history, where you're at. They're going to draw your most recent labs and make recommendations accordingly. And oftentimes, your doctor's office will also have great resources. We also have a resource, of course, at healthiermichigan.org with lots of healthy recipes and more information about what we talked about today. But all in all, the major kind of 3 things that you can do to prevent diabetes is, of course, to eat healthier, doing some of the things that we talked about today, eating more plant foods, getting more fiber, because that helps in so many different ways. So if you're just doing one thing, maybe it can be replacing one of these ultra processed foods with a more fiber rich option. We also can think about losing a little bit of weight. That's 7 to 10%. So if that's someone who weighs 250 pounds, that could be something like 17 pounds to start out with. That significantly reduces the risk. And I know that does sound hard, but it can be done with very small steps, right, towards that.
Absolutely.
And then being more physically active. That's the final thing I'll say. And if you're not someone who has a lot of time for that, something you can try to do too is just try to be less physically inactive. Try sitting less, standing more.
That absolutely makes sense. Shanti, always a pleasure. And with Thanksgiving right around the corner, it's good to know what foods we should try to avoid. And we'll make sure all the links that you need, it's all going to be available after the show today over on 9and10news.com. Shanti, thank you so much for taking the time and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.